My name is Heather Thieme. My camera person is Felicia Anderson. We are interviewing Jamie Bly. Today is the 11th of January, and the location is RFA. Can you please state your name and branch of service and rank?
James Bly, United States Air Force, and I retired as a Master Sergeant at E7.
Okay. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Elmira, New York, August 23rd, 1948.
What was your pre-service education?
I graduated from high school and I went into the Air Force right after high school.
When did you enter the service?
August 13th, 1966.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
Oh, I enlisted. In fact, I enlisted when I was 17, so I never even had a draft card.
Why did you join the Air Force?
I have a lot of family that had been in the military. My father was in the old Army Air Corps. I had uncles in the Air Force, and I knew back when I was in middle school, really, that I wanted to go into the Air Force.
Where did you receive your basic training?
At Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas.
What was your specific training?
After basic training, I went to radio maintenance school in Mississippi, and that was about 35 weeks of training on repairing of aircraft radios.
What was your unit?
Initial unit, after my training, I was assigned to the 509th Bomb Wing at Pease Air Force Base, which is in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
How would you rate your training and the equipment that was?
Well, the training was excellent. The people that provided the training had many years of experience doing what we were doing, the repair work, and then they went on to become instructors in it. And it was quite intense. It was quite intense. We had to really be able to perform those duties before we could do the job.
What was the first place you were stationed at, first base?
Well, at Portsmouth, at Pease Air Force Base, and I was assigned to the airborne radio maintenance shop.
Did you have any combat experience?
Yes, in 1969 and 1970, I was all over Southeast Asia.
How did you feel during combat?
Well, I think like everybody, scared to some extent. It was something that, being in the Air Force and the job that I was doing, we weren't on the ground in combat per se, like the Army or the Marines. But in our flying duties, there were many times that we would have the North Vietnamese MiGs that would take off, and they would come chase us out of where we were and things like that. So, when something like that happened, of course, it got a little bit scarier.
What sort of medals or awards did you receive?
Well, during my period in Vietnam, along with the medals, the campaign medals and things for being in Vietnam, I was awarded 3 air medals for aerial flight. I had somewhere over 70 combat missions that I flew, and beyond that, after that time period, commendation medals, meritorious service medals, like that. This is just a shadow box that my wife had made up for me, showing the different medals and the different badges and things that I wore. When I was flying combat, I received my flight wings, combat flight wings, and I spent time working with missile systems. I was on a specialized type of an aircraft, so we worked with missile systems and computers and things, so that's what some of the other badges were. This pin right here was from when I was a recruiter. I spent time as an Air Force recruiter, and so that was kind of a way to sum up my career in the Air Force.
When you were stationed overseas, how did you keep in touch with those at home?
Letter writing, lots of letter writing. The other way is when I was over there, I was married, so my wife and I both had tape recorders, and we would do tape recordings and send them to each other. Not even cassettes; they were little tape reels. So we would record them and send them back and forth to each other.
What was the food and supplies?
As far as the Air Force goes, pretty good. We always ate pretty good, and especially being on a flight crew, I think that we got even a little bit better food. There wasn't, I don't think there was anything that I didn't particularly like to eat. It was always well prepared, and so I did well by it.
What was your most memorable experience as far as your entire military career?
My most memorable experience. I would say after the Vietnam War, when the prisoners of war were released and they came back to the States, they spent some downtime. They were going to school and everything, but about 2 years after they came back, I got to know a few of them very, very well, and to listen to their experiences, to see their outlook on life, I think it was a wonderful experience, and I think a lot of the things that I have done since then and things that I do today are based on some insight that I gained about life and things like that from talking to them.
How did you feel about your military experience as a whole?
As a whole, it was fantastic. I did serve 20 years. I retired from the Air Force, and as I said previously, when I was young, I wanted to go into the Air Force, and I had in the back of my mind that I wanted to make it a career, and I did make it a career, and there was nothing that I ever regretted in what I had done. I experienced so many things, got to know so many people. I had opportunities to change jobs, to try other things. It was just fantastic. Not talking about sometimes when you had to work 24 hours or 36 hours straight, some of the conditions when we were flying, family separation, they weren't that great if you're looking at it as an overall experience. It was just fantastic.
What was the date when you were stationed in Vietnam?
I got there in March of 1969, and I left in June of 1970.
What were your relationships with the Vietnamese population?
We had some contact, but not a lot. We spent most of our time away from everything else because of our mission, because of our aircraft. But when I did have an opportunity to go into the towns and things like that, I very much enjoyed it. I found that the Vietnamese people were really no different than anybody else, except that they happened to be in the middle of the war, and you know, you would think that there's a big language problem, and in some cases there were, but for the most part, the Vietnamese learned to speak enough English so we could understand them, and we tried as much as we could to try to learn, you know, the basic Vietnamese terms so we could at least get what we were looking for, go where we wanted to go, and have them understand it.
What about the South Vietnamese soldiers?
The contact that I had with South Vietnamese soldiers, I think I was impressed. They were working under some terrible conditions. I don't think many people had much confidence in them. Of course, you never knew whether they were South Vietnamese or really North Vietnamese, but the ones I had contact with, I was impressed. They were military people for the most part, just like we were. You know, some of them I'm sure were drafted into the service, and some of them probably joined because they wanted to. But as soldiers, I was impressed.
Describe your relationships with the different races within your unit.
We had a number of ethnic groups within the unit that I flew with. I think most of them were African American. Relations were good. When we look back at our history and see all the problems like in the South and in cities, inner cities and things like that, when we get to the military, it isn't necessarily like that. You know, I've seen people that have prejudices, but in a military unit, especially a combat unit, that's your brother. You know, he's watching your back, you're watching his back, and you don't see color. You don't see religious background. You see a brother.
What about the government officials? Your relationship with them?
We did what they told us to do. Politicians are politicians. Some set our direction. Some of them have a clue as to what they're doing. Some of them I don't believe do. Some of them are just politicians. There are some people that have military backgrounds, and of course I think for the most part military people see that because the way they act, you can see that military background. They have more of an idea of what's going on in the military.
What was your reaction to the replacement of Westmoreland?
Unfortunately, I think when a general gets to that point, he's part military and half political. Westmoreland had a tough job to do. He was doing what he could, I think, to affect a positive military outcome, but in a lot of respects, I think he was constrained by our government. And to some extent, information that he gave our government was information that the government was looking for, and not maybe necessarily the facts, the truth. He was in a tough place. He was a soldier that cared about his soldiers, but when you've got your hands kind of tied behind your back, it's tough.
What did you think of the election of Nixon? Did you vote?
Oh, I have always voted. Yes, ma'am. I voted for Nixon. I felt that Nixon was the best choice at that time. I was happy with a lot of things that Nixon did. Sometimes I had my doubts. And even when he ran the second time, I voted for him the second time, because even with all his problems, I don't know, maybe we're cynical at times, but most people said, well, he just got caught doing what all the other presidents have done also. And to some extent I agree with that. But for the most part, again, he was doing, I think, what he thought was best. And I can't fault anybody for doing that.
And what part of Vietnam did you serve? Did terrain and climate affect the battle situations?
Well, again, with my particular job, I flew, and other than going in and flying in and out of Vietnam, my aircraft themselves were actually stationed in Thailand. We were in Taiwan for a while. We flew out of Okinawa for a while. But what we would do is we would launch our aircraft. We would fly down to the Gulf of Tonkin, and we would fly our missions in the Gulf of Tonkin. We flew a racetrack pattern up over the Gulf, and we provided communications links to ground, naval, and air units. If there were emergencies, if there was a plane that was shot down, we would make sure that we relayed all those messages so everybody knew what was going on. So the only time we had to worry about weather is, you know, if there was a typhoon or something in the area or things like that. for the most part, it didn't bother communications, and we were usually up high enough where there wasn't any problems like on the ground.
What types of aircrafts did you fly?
Primarily EC-135s, which is like the civilian Boeing 707. It's a 4-engine jet. The EC-135 was an electronics aircraft, thousands and thousands of pounds of communications equipment. It had, not only did it have its crew of 4, but usually there were anywhere from 4 to 15 crew members in the back working all the equipment.
How did you feel about the rotation system and why?
As an individual, I liked the rotation system. That meant that I was going to spend a year or a year and a half and come home. From a military point of view, from a point of view of a country going in fighting a war, like with World War II, you went to where you were going and you were there until it was over, or until you died or was wounded and had to leave. So I think the rotation system individually was good. I think from a military standpoint, it wasn't a sound idea. Just when you would start getting used to what you were doing, the routine, it'd be time to leave, and they'd bring in somebody brand new and they'd have to learn all over again.
What people do you remember most from your service?
I remember a number of supervisors when I was first in the Air Force, because they provided a lot of leadership, a lot of fatherly type image, bringing me along, helping me to learn my job, how to do it, making me think about how I'm doing it. And as I went along in service, then some of my commanders, and in the same light, and again, the POWs that I met, that I got to know, really getting an insight on what life is really all about. And then some of the comrades that I was with day in and day out, that I flew with, that I lived with, all those things. There were a number of them that even today, 30-some years later, I still correspond with, I talk with now and again. There's nothing like combat to make you a very close-knit family that we never thought about it back then, but now with all the stuff that's been in the movies and stuff, Band of Brothers, that's a very true statement, because you are closer than your family after you've lived with these people for a long time, and many of them impressed me. These weren't just kids off the street doing something for a few years and going home. There was a dedication there, and it was impressive.
How did you feel about the peace movement or draft resistors?
That's what the military fights for their right to do that. I think if the military had the chance, the military would be right out there with the peace protesters too, because there's no one any more strongly that does not want war. Because when war happens, we were the ones that were out there doing the fighting. We were the ones out there dying. So did we resent them? Yeah, probably, I would say so. We always just refer to a lot of them as a bunch of spoiled college kids that, as long as they protested and draft dodged, they could go out drinking and partying and carrying on. But they had every right to do that, and I firmly believe that to this day we'll defend their right to do that. The draft dodgers, those that went to Canada, I know President Ford pardoned them and let them come home. As far as I'm concerned, they could have stayed in Canada. That went a little bit beyond. That was something that was illegal, I guess I would want to say. But it's hard to say sometimes where to draw the line. Who was really against war? Who were the conscientious objectors? Who were the ones that were just still trying to stay out of it? But what happens, happens, and life goes on.
Was American involvement in Vietnam justified? In your opinion?
Yes, I think so. I think so. I think ever since World War II, this country has taken on, the term used is that policeman image, world police image, that we go in places because we can. I think because we have the power to do so, and I don't necessarily mean military power, but economic power. We, as a country, see ourselves as trying to help those that can't help themselves. Whether it was in Korea or Vietnam, we've taken on that role, and I think 99% of the time we have tried to justifiably provide a positive influence in those places. We have not gone to war to take over other countries, to dominate, to say that now we control this. As much as possible, we go in, we do what we can do, and we get out. We try to leave it to the people there then to get their lives back on track. We're doing that right now.
Explain the different jobs that you had in the different countries you were stationed.
Okay. Well, as I said earlier, I started out in aircraft radio repair. I did that in New Hampshire at Pease Air Force Base for about a year and a half. I went back to a technical school to learn some other equipment and computer repair, and at that point I was stationed in Omaha, Nebraska, and I was maintaining communications and computer equipment on the EC-135. This was with the Strategic Air Command, a unit that doesn't exist anymore, but our aircraft was the Airborne Command Post, called Looking Glass. And that was an aircraft for many, many years that was in the air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What that aircraft was there for was that if, during the Cold War, if the Russians attacked us with nuclear missiles, our aircraft from the air could take over command of all the Air Force inventory, handle all the bombers and things. We had the computers. We could launch all the underground missiles from the air. And so that was a pretty awesome responsibility. Where I tied into that is the communications equipment, the computers that would launch those missiles, I had to make sure it was maintained. And we had an in-flight repair capability. So if something stopped working, we could fix it right there on the airplane. So we would stay viable. From Omaha, and that was in 69, 68 and 69, and at that point I went overseas to Southeast Asia. Primarily, most of the time I was actually stationed in Taiwan. That's where our primary base was. And then we would fly out of sometimes Thailand, sometimes out of Vietnam. But most of the time we'd fly there. They were usually about 12, 13-hour missions. It would take us about an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to our mission area. We'd fly, do our thing, and then fly back. After that, in June of 70, I was stationed at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. And again, the same airplane, the same type of functions. We would be there for communications. After that, in 1972, I came to Geneva, New York, where I was a recruiter for 4 years. And I was looking for young people that were interested in joining the Air Force and getting a career and maybe learning something and being able to use what they'd learned. After that, was, let's see, 1975, I went back out to South Dakota. I was stationed out there again. And at that time, because of an accident that I had as a volunteer fireman, I couldn't do that job anymore. I couldn't lift equipment, so I ended up going into medical administration. And out at Ellsworth, I worked in medical administration at the hospital there. 1979, I came here to the Griff, and I was here from 79 to 86 when I retired. While I was here, I was in medical administration, and then I also spent 4 years as a PME instructor, professional military education. I taught leadership and communication skills to new supervisors. And 1986, I retired, and spent a few years out of there, and then I found that many states have state defense forces, and I joined the State Defense Force, which I'm still in, which is a state military organization, and I'm here.
Which base do you feel you learned the most or experienced the most?
Probably my assignment to Southeast Asia, and again, primarily, we were stationed in Taiwan. It was CCK Air Base. It was a Chinese Air Force base. And simply because the year and a half that I spent there, the intense stuff that we did, the combat that we did, that was probably my most memorable experience.
What do you consider your most valuable reward?
My most valuable reward, probably knowing the people that I know, having a real positive outlook on life because of my experiences, and I think maybe the ability to pass that on to people, to present. Sound like my recruiting days, but to show that the military has a lot to offer to people.
How old were you when you finally arrived home from Vietnam?
I think I was 20 when I came back from Vietnam. Yeah, about 20.
And what was your welcome like?
Fortunately, I was still in the military. And so when I flew back, I flew into, let's see, coming back from Vietnam. Actually, I came back on a military aircraft. We landed at a military base. I immediately went on leave and came home for a month. So I didn't have the wonderful welcome that a lot of other vets got. Because they would hit like San Francisco, they'd get off the airplane, they would be discharged, and there they were among all those peace protesters and things like that. And I have some friends that went through that, and I don't think I would have cared for the reception that they got. But I was still in the military, so I went right back to my military stuff. So the homecoming I got was from my family when I got back home, and that was a pretty good experience.
So you didn't take a break in between missions?
No. Other than my 30-day leave that I took, stayed right with it and just kept right on going.
Do you belong to any veterans organizations?
Yes. Name it. I belong to it. Yeah, the VFW, the American Legion, Air Force Sergeants Association, Non-Commissioned Officers Association, Air Force Association, Vietnam Veterans Association. Yes, I do. I don't actively participate much because I do have a full-time job. I am pretty busy, but I have life memberships in most of them, and I figure when I get to the point when I fully retire, then I probably will become more active with some of those groups.
What sort of Vietnam movies have you seen, and what were your reactions to them?
I think I've seen all of them. Of course, my earliest recollection, I think, was Platoon. A lot of controversy over Platoon, but it tried to combine every negative thing that happened to any soldier in Vietnam all into one movie, which wasn't reality. It wasn't valid. But I think if you picked apart saying yes, you knew that happened. But beyond that, it built more and more and more. The last Vietnam movie that I saw was We Were Soldiers, which to me was probably the ultimate military film, as close to reality as possible. It was based on a true story. The technical advisor was the guy that Mel Gibson played. So I thought it very well depicted the military. But what I liked even better is the depiction of the military family back home and the things that they went through. Just fantastic. But for the most part, the movies are Hollywood movies, and we know that they can do anything they want with those.
Have you visited the wall in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, I did. Took me a while to go. A lot of apprehension, but as a teacher, there got probably in 1993 or 1994, I took a group of kids to Washington for a 3-day field trip, and that was one of the places that the tour went to. So I made that trip. Awesome experience. Awesome experience. You can't describe to anybody else what it is about it, except there's something about it. To understand it, then to find names of people that you knew, that you were stationed with. It's awesome. It's awesome. And a little bit of irony, I guess, is the girl that designed it, the Vietnamese girl. Fantastic. But there's nothing that I have found that compares to that memorial. In bringing out emotion. You're almost awestruck. The government has had to spend millions of dollars on warehousing for all the artifacts, mementos that are left there. It's just unbelievable. It does something to everybody, and that's something that everybody should experience once.
How did your military experience change or influence your life?
Well, to start with, it really gave me a sense of direction. As I said earlier, I came right out of high school, 17 years old, and joined the military. So I wasn't even an adult yet. I hadn't formed any lifelong things or anything, and it really gave me a sense of direction, a sense of purpose. My different experiences really led me into the career that I'm in now, and I have no problem being able to sit back and trying to analyze things and understand things, understand people, accept people, without just being prejudiced against somebody, getting to know who they are first, and then if they're jerks, then I can call them jerks, but. Because it doesn't matter who we are, what we look like, or what our religion is, we're either a good person or we're a jerk. And I think the military really gave me that ability to sit back and do that, to evaluate people on who they are, not what they look like.
Are there any specific stories you want to share?
Humorous also?
Yes.
Okay. When I first got into the Airborne Command Post field, which was at Offutt in Nebraska, that was the headquarters of Strategic Air Command. That's where the Looking Glass plane flew out of. All the others were relay, but that was the main plane. On that plane, when it goes up, as I said, that can launch the missiles and everything. There's a general officer that flies on there. There's a 1 or 2 star general. He's the top guy. The head of the Strategic Air Command, we refer to him as the SINC, or SINC-SAC, Commander-in-Chief. He was the top general. He was a 4-star general. And on one particular mission, after I had just arrived there, I wasn't even flying yet, I was learning the job. The SINC-SAC, General Doherty, I believe, was going to be the general on board. The plane takes about 3 hours to prepare for flight. And during this time period, there's missile codes, there's all kinds of things. It's a very highly secured area. It's roped off, there's security guards with their guns, you've got to have an ID card, you've got to be on an access list, all this stuff or you don't get on the airplane. And so I was working a midnight shift. I came in, that plane was already supposed to have taken off, but the general, and of course everybody waits on the general had another meeting that he was at, so he was late. I came on shift and we were told we're pre-flighting an airplane, getting it ready to fly. Nobody said it had been pre-flighted and everything, but we have to be out there and stand by. So we went out on a maintenance truck, and for as little as I knew, when we pre-flight an airplane, I get off the truck, I go on the airplane, there's certain things that I do. And so I got off the truck, the security guards let us on the plane, and I started doing the things that I need to do. One of the things is that there's a tape reader that gets the computers ready to get all their codes and everything so it works. So I put a maintenance tape in and I start this thing up so I can get it to 0 so they can build it up. All of a sudden there's these guys running from the backs of the plane. They've got guns out and I'm in a world of hurt. They immediately hustle me off the aircraft. Well, as they're taking me off the aircraft, here comes the general so he can go fly. Except now he's not going to be able to fly because I just wiped everything out of the computers because they had already been loaded, they were all ready to go, they were just waiting for the general. So I get taken back to the maintenance shop and I'm getting grilled. I'm getting asked all kinds of questions. I never heard another thing about it after that night. A month later I was on my way to Vietnam after only about 5 or 6 months at Offutt. I don't know how I got there so quick, but I think it was arranged. But when I got off the truck, the security guard had an access list. The access list they had were for the people that had already left the work. I was not on the access list. I was not even allowed to get on the airplane. When I got on the airplane and I got to this tape reader, there's supposed to be an officer up there with his weapon guarding this area. Well, because they had been waiting for a couple of hours, they were all in the back, sitting back, having coffee and talking, so I did that. Well, there were so many people higher up than me that got in trouble that I was the least of everything. So that's probably my most humorous story. I guess the next closest one was when I was in Southeast Asia. We had an aircraft take off, and at the end of the airfield this was on the Chinese base. There was a 9-hole golf course, and the plane took off, and one of the engines fell off and almost made a hole in one. We live by humor. Because a lot of the other stuff we don't talk about, we don't like to talk about. The humor's always present.
Since you've retired, how have the other jobs that you've held compared to those that you had overseas or in the military in general?
Well, after I retired, I became a teacher, and I'm a teacher today. Is it as dangerous as my military duties? No. Is it more important? Yeah. To me, I think yes. What I do is extremely important now. I work with 7th and 8th graders, and it's an awesome responsibility. Again, it doesn't hold the same thing as the military duties, but this is big. Also, as I said before, I'm in the State Defense Force here in New York, and what we do is we provide support to the Air National Guard, and so we do duties. That's pretty awesome. that's unique. When 9/11 hit, I was on active duty for the state for almost a year, doing duty here in New York, and so I've kept my fingers in the military side of it.
What advice or words of wisdom would you give to anyone about to join the military?
I would counsel anyone that a few years in the military would probably benefit them. You learn discipline, you learn structure. You come out, if you just even a couple of years in the military, you come out as a mature adult. I see kids going off to college that first semester college is party 101. There is no structure. They're away from home for the first times, and it's great. They love it, and that's fine, I guess, as long as they can buckle down. But the military can teach so much for a lot of kids that aren't going to college. This gives them an opportunity to learn some skills. And even the downside, the combat side of it, 99% of the kids is very, very, very important, and the military can really give them that direction. While I was in the military, I got 3 associate's degrees, my bachelor's degree, my master's degree. That's the last thing I was an educatable individual when I come out of high school. So it gives everybody such an advantage, I think, and even kids getting out of the military after a few years, employers look at those people much better than they do kids just coming out of high school or even just college, because they know what that military background means. So I absolutely, I would suggest everybody look at it.
Thank you.